The corridor smelled like burned copper and old grief. Commander Eli Voss noticed it the moment the airlock cycled open, that particular combination of scorched metal and something organic, something that had been sealed away for a very long time. The derelict hung in the debris field off the third moon of Karath 7 like a tooth knocked loose but not yet swallowed, its hull pitted by centuries of micro-impacts, its running lights dead, its distress beacon cycling on a frequency so ancient that the fleet's newer ships wouldn't have even registered it. Voss's ship, the Perseverance, was old enough to hear it. He stepped through the airlock alone, which was against protocol. He'd sent his crew back to the Perseverance the moment the beacon started translating. What it said, he hadn't told them. He wasn't sure he could say it out loud without it sounding like the kind of thing a person says right before something goes very badly. The translated signal had said, in 17 different dead languages stacked like geological strata, "Open me. I am tired of waiting." The derelict's corridors were wide and low, built for something that moved differently than humans, something that perhaps flowed rather than walked. The walls were covered in script that the Perseverance's translation matrix had classified as pre-expansion Keth, a civilization that had burned itself out 14,000 years ago arguing about resource allocation and the proper way to address one's elders. Voss's personal opinion, developed over 3 months of flying past their archaeological ruins, was that those two arguments were probably connected. The script was not decorative. It was warning, repetitive, insistent warning in a language that had been dead since before humans had discovered fire. Do not open the vault. Do not open the vault. Do not open the vault. Voss walked toward the vault. He'd been a soldier for 19 years. He'd fought the Vreth Collective at the Battle of Dorne Station, lost 32 people under his command in the Siege of Kallax, and spent 3 years as a prisoner of the hegemony before a prisoner exchange that had left him feeling more emptied out than the captivity itself had. He had a daughter back on Meridian Station, Priya, 7 years old, who collected pressed flowers and had her mother's laugh, and called him on his comm every third day without fail, even when he forgot to check the time zone difference. He had an ex-wife, Sasha, who had moved on with a man named Gordon who coached youth orbital ball and apparently remembered birthdays. He had a ration bar in his left breast pocket, and a sidearm he hadn't fired in 6 months, and the particular kind of tiredness that doesn't come from lack of sleep. He found the vault in the ship's center. It was a chest, that was the only word for it, roughly 2 meters by 1, constructed from a material his scanner couldn't classify, covered in locks that were not mechanical but seemed to respond to proximity like sleeping eyes beginning to open. As he stepped closer, the locks oriented toward him, considered him in the particular way that old things consider things that are new to them, not threatening, not welcoming, simply observing. The amber color of the locks deepened slightly as he came within arm's reach. Something inside knocked twice. The sound was not loud. It was, in fact, very quiet, the kind of knock that is clearly not trying to break anything, that is instead trying to be heard without demanding. Voss stood still for a moment, listening to the silence after it. He sat down on the floor across from the vault. The floor was cold through his suit. The derelict had no active temperature systems, and the space cold was getting in through the hull microfractures the way it always did, the way nothing ever fully stopped it. He sat with his back against the opposite wall, knees up, and looked at the chest and its amber locks looking back at him. "Go ahead," he said. The locks opened. What came out was not what he expected. He wasn't sure what he had expected. Something vast and terrible, something that would fill the corridor with its presence and demand tribute in the bones of civilizations. What emerged was roughly the size of a large dog, asymmetrical in the way that living things grown very old sometimes become asymmetrical, as though the universe had been correcting its design philosophy over millennia and hadn't quite committed to any single iteration. It had 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern, All of them, a deep amber that seemed to contain light rather than reflect it, like lanterns that had been burning for so long the glass had taken on the color permanently. Its surface was neither fur nor scale nor plate, but something that had aspects of all three and the precise quality of none of them, and it moved with the careful deliberateness of something that had learned not to startle the things it encountered. It came out of the chest and sat on the floor of the corridor and looked at Voss for a long moment. Then it said, in accented but clear standard, "You're the first one who sat down." Voss thought about that. "How many have found you?" 7 species, including yours twice, though the first time was about 3,000 years ago and you were considerably shorter. It settled back on its haunches. The motion was unhurried, almost ceremonial. The others either ran, tried to capture me, or attempted to weaponize the situation. The last group was the most tiresome. They had very good armor and very poor imaginations. "What are you?" "Old," it said. "Old is the most accurate thing. I have a designation in 42 languages, and they all mean approximately the same thing. In yours, I suppose it would translate most closely as the one who was here before the question was asked." Voss pulled the ration bar from his pocket, broke it in half, and held one half out. The creature regarded it. "What is that?" "Compressed protein and sadness. It's what we eat when we're far from home." A long pause. Then it reached out with one of its appendages, more like a root than a hand, branching at the tip into 6 fine filaments, and took the offered half. It held it in those filaments for a moment, turning it slightly. Did not eat it, but it held it, and something in its posture shifted in a way Voss couldn't name but recognized as significant the way he recognized most significant things, by the feeling of the air changing around them. "The Vreth called me the devouring eye," it said. "The hegemony called me the unbound theorem. The Keth called me mercy, which is why they're gone." It looked at the ration bar a moment longer. "What will you call me?" Voss thought for a moment. "Keeper," he said, "since you seem to have been keeping things." "Keeper," it repeated, as though tasting the word. "That will do." They sat in the dark of the dead ship for 3 hours. Voss asked questions, and the keeper answered them, sometimes in full and sometimes in the particular non-answer of something that has watched consequences propagate across millennia and learned to be careful with information the way a doctor is careful with dosage, because the same thing that cures in one amount destroys in another. It had observed 17 spacefaring civilizations. It had intervened in the histories of 4. In 2 of those cases, things had gone better. In the other 2, the word *better* stopped applying to anything in the affected systems for roughly 600 years. It had been sealed in the vault not as punishment but as its own choice. A withdrawal from a universe it had, for a period of roughly 800 years, found genuinely disorienting. "Which civilization disoriented you?" Voss asked. "Yours," said the keeper. "The first time I encountered humans I assumed I understood the pattern. I had seen 32 dominant species by that point. They all followed recognizable arcs: expansion, resource conflict, internal fracture, collapse, or transcendence. I had filed humanity in the expansion phase, and was preparing to observe the resource conflict when something happened that I had no category for." "What happened?" "A woman in what you would call ancient Mesopotamia was attempting to move a stone that was too heavy for her. 3 strangers who had no obligation to her and no benefit to be gained stopped what they were doing and helped her move it. None of them spoke the same language. They communicated through gesture. When the stone was moved, they laughed together." Voss waited. "I have watched species tear each other apart over water, over light, over the memory of slights that occurred before the aggrieved parties were born. I have never before that moment seen a species choose difficulty for the benefit of a stranger without calculation, without expected return, without hierarchy demanding it." The keeper's amber eyes were very still. "I spent 800 years trying to understand if it was an anomaly. It was not. You do it constantly. It is, in fact, your primary mode of social organization, dressed in so many costumes that it took me centuries to see it clearly for what it was. A pause that stretched long enough to feel like something settling. That is when I sealed myself in the vault. I needed to think. Did you reach a conclusion? I reached the conclusion that I was lonely, said the keeper, which was also a category I had not previously had cause to use. He brought the keeper back to the Perseverance. He told his crew it was a recovered artifact, which was technically accurate. He filed a report with Fleet Command that described finding an ancient intelligence of unknown origin and classification, which was also accurate. The report was flagged, processed, bounced up 3 levels of command, and then quietly classified and shuffled into the vast administrative dark, where things that didn't fit the existing framework went to wait for someone with the clearance and the inclination to deal with them. Nobody came. For 6 months, the keeper lived in a repurposed storage compartment on Deck 4 that it had, within 48 hours, reorganized into something that managed to feel like both a library and a burrow. It cataloged the Perseverance's archive with visible enthusiasm, repaired 2 systems the crew had given up on, and occasionally offered unsolicited opinions on human history that were so precisely correct they made the crew uncomfortable in the specific way that things make you uncomfortable when they are accurate about things you'd rather not examine too closely. It never slept. It ate very little, occasionally accepting things that had been heavily spiced, which it seemed to find interesting the way a musicologist might find an unfamiliar instrument interesting, worth extended examination. It told stories, long ones, delivered in the even voice of something that has witnessed time in quantities that make the word asterisk long semantically complex. The crew listened because the keeper's voice had a quality that made not listening feel like a choice you'd regret, the way you'd regret setting down a book at the wrong chapter. Engineer Chow started leaving cups of heavily spiced tea outside Deck 4. The keeper started leaving them empty. Voss called Priya every 3rd day. Sometimes the keeper sat nearby and listened, very still, in the way it had of absorbing things it found significant, a stillness that was not passive but attentive, the way a person is still in a museum when they've found the thing they came for. One evening, Priya asked to see what was making that sound in the background. Voss turned the comm toward the keeper. Priya, 7 years old, looked at a 4-eyed ancient being of incalculable age with the unsettling directness of small children, who have not yet learned the social rule that you shouldn't stare at things that are unusual. "You have nice eyes," she said. The keeper looked at her for a long moment. In that moment, Voss had the distinct impression that something very old was recalibrating. "Thank you," it said. "Yours are extraordinary." Priya beamed. She told her mother that evening. Sasha, being Sasha, asked for a full briefing, which Voss provided over 45 minutes and which resulted in Sasha sitting in silence for a while and then saying, "Eli, you have always had the most alarming luck," in a tone that was not entirely critical. That was how the situation became complicated. The hegemony found the Perseverance 4 weeks later. This was not a coincidence. The keeper confirmed this calmly, as it confirmed most things, with the particular precision of something that has been a loose end in someone else's calculation for longer than that civilization had existed. The hegemony had been searching for it for 12,000 years, through 7 emperors and 4 dynastic revolutions, as a constant item on the imperial agenda, the way that certain debts stay on certain ledgers through generations. The hegemony were not human. Their biology was insectal at its foundation, though they had long since augmented themselves beyond anything their progenitor species would recognize, plating themselves in cultivated chitin composite that responded to their emotional states, communicating in layered harmonic frequencies that required translation at speeds modern systems sometimes struggled to maintain. building their empire on a combination of genuine brilliance and the specific kind of ruthlessness that brilliant species develop when they run out of external enemies to organize themselves against. They were, by most objective measures, magnificent. Their methods, Voss had experienced firsthand during the 3 years he'd spent in hegemony custody after Kallax. He did not think about those 3 years directly if he could avoid it. He thought about them the way you think about a structural injury, aware of it always, working around it, never pretending it wasn't there. The hegemony ship that emerged from transit was not a patrol vessel. It was a throne-class carrier, the kind that carried an empress and her war council, and enough firepower to significantly alter the geography of a small moon. It was called the Unbroken Reckoning, and it was the flagship of Empress Vethsarakwi, who had ruled the hegemony for 60 years and had a reputation that preceded her by approximately 6 light years in any direction, and that, in Voss's experience, was entirely deserved. The translation came through standard channels, carrying all the harmonic layering that indicated the highest possible authority. Surrender the unbound theorem, or be rendered into its component particles. Voss looked at the keeper. The keeper said quite calmly, "She won't do it. She has a throne-class carrier. She has a throne-class carrier and a tactical problem. If she destroys this vessel with me aboard it, she loses what she came for. She knows she cannot extract me by force. She has tried this indirectly through subordinates, and I made it very educational for everyone involved." The keeper paused. "She will negotiate. She does not like to negotiate. She finds it beneath her station. This will make her irritable." "How do you know all this about her specifically?" "I have been watching her empire for 60 years. She is the most interesting thing her species has produced in 4 centuries. A pause. "Also, I read her correspondence when they were 3 days out from us. Her shielding is sophisticated but not sophisticated enough for someone paying attention." Voss opened the channel. The Empress appeared on screen, her full armored form, the ceremonial faceplate that indicated she was speaking in her most official capacity. The War Council ranged behind her in the precise hierarchy of a civilization that had had 12,000 years to formalize everything. Voss had seen her once before, briefly, during the prisoner exchange at Kallax's aftermath. She had not looked at him then. She was looking at him now, with the specific quality of attention that reminded him of the keeper, and he realized with a start that she had spent decades trying to find the thing that now sat in his ship, and that she was, even now, not looking at him but calculating the space around him. "Commander Voss," she said, through translation, "you have something that belongs to my empire." "With respect, Empress, the keeper belongs to no empire. It told me so itself, and it was quite specific about it." A pause. The harmonics shifted in a way the translator flagged as asterisk displeasure, contained but real. "You have had several months with the unbound theorem. In that time, it has presumably told you things. What it has told you, my empire has a prior claim to." The theorem was operating within hegemony space for 11,000 years. It was sealed within a derelict that predates the hegemony by 4,000 years. The derelict was built by the Keth, who are, as you know, not currently available to represent their interests. Another pause. The harmonics shifted again, displeasure less contained. "You are a junior commander on an aging ship. You have no standing to adjudicate ownership claims on artifacts of galactic significance." "I'm not adjudicating ownership. I'm pointing out that you don't have any either." He paused. "With respect." The War Council stirred. The one directly behind the Empress's left shoulder, tall, plated in darker chitin than the others, with the posture of someone who had been waiting his entire career for exactly this kind of permission, leaned forward. His designation translated as High Marshal Vreth Consol. His files, which the keeper had made available to Voss 3 days ago, and which Voss had read with the methodical dread of someone reviewing a threat assessment, were extensive and unpleasant. Then we collected ourselves, said the High Marshal, and we assessed the cost of the effort against the terrestrial compact. Voss muted the channel. He looked at the keeper. Options. Several, most of them involve you being dramatically outgunned. The keeper tilted its asymmetrical head. However, there is a matter regarding the High Marshal. He has a project, a weapons project specifically, that the Empress does not know about and would not approve of. I am aware of the contents because I can access hegemony data architecture from a significant distance, and his shielding, while impressive for a military system, was not designed with me in mind. You can read their systems remotely. I can access most things remotely, given sufficient time and sufficient reason. I generally decline to. It feels like reading correspondence that was not addressed to me, and I have aged past finding that interesting. A pause that managed to be delicate. However, he has been planning to dissect me for 30 years. I have certain feelings about that, and they affect my usual standards of privacy. Voss was quiet for a moment. How much of their system? All of it from here, in real time. A longer silence. That, said Voss, is information I would have found useful to have approximately 6 months ago. You didn't ask. I'm asking now. Can you display the High Marshal's archive, specifically the classified project, on their screens as well as ours? Yes. Do it. He reopened the channel. The Empress was exactly where he'd left her, still, patient in the way of something that has been calibrating the terms of the universe for 6 decades. Behind her, the High Marshal had moved slightly closer, which was either confidence or instinct, and which was about to be neither. Empress, Voss said, before we continue, I'd like to show you something. The keeper moved its filaments in a small, precise pattern. The Unbroken Reckoning's internal schematics appeared on every screen on the Perseverance simultaneously, and, the keeper confirmed with quiet satisfaction, on every screen on the Hegemony flagship as well. But what the Empress and her council were seeing on their screens was not the schematics themselves. They were seeing the contents of High Marshal Vreth Consol's private research archive. Decades of it. The weapons programs drawn from previous attempts to capture or replicate the Keeper's capabilities. The unauthorized negotiations with 3 hegemony client states, conducted without imperial sanction. The personal correspondence, including 12 years of communication with a faction of the War Council who had concluded, in documented and detailed language, that the Empress's reign had lasted long enough, and that it was time for a more decisive hand. The harmonics from the hegemony channel went strange. Not one frequency, all of them, simultaneously, as 60 hegemony courtiers and council members and guards processed, in real time, what was on their screens. It was, Voss would later describe in his report, like watching a very large and very precisely calibrated machine encounter something it had not been designed for. The High Marshal's posture changed. The translator did not have precise language for what it became, offering asterisk exposure and the particular terror of a predator suddenly understanding it is also prey as the closest available approximations. The Empress turned slowly and looked at her High Marshal. Voss muted the channel. He let the silence work. He had learned across 19 years that silence after revelation always does more than anything you can add to it. This is going to take a few minutes, he said to the keeper. Approximately 20, the keeper confirmed. She is thorough. She will want to be certain before she acts, because she has always been a person who ensures her certainty before she acts, which is one of the things that has made her reign last as long as it has. It was 18 minutes. When the Empress turned back to the camera, her harmonics had changed in a way that the translator spent 4 seconds processing before producing. Controlled fury, efficiently redirected. The difference between before and after was not in her posture or her expression. Both were exactly as composed as they had been. The difference was in the quality of the silence between her words. "You have made a point," she said. "I acknowledge the point." "Thank you, Empress." "Do not thank me, Commander. I am currently deciding whether to be impressed or insulted." A pause in which several things happened behind her that Voss noted and filed. "The High Marshal will be dealt with through hegemony law. That is not your concern. What is your concern is the following. The unbound theorem has been a variable in our calculations for 12,000 years. Every empire, every civilization that has encountered it, has tried to resolve the variable. You have apparently befriended it, which is either very stupid or very human, and I have lived long enough to understand that those two things are not always different." Voss said nothing. "My daughter," said the Empress, and her harmonics shifted into something the translator had never encountered before and flagged as * personal frequency, not performed, "has been studying your species for 3 years. Ever since the Second Dawn engagement, when your fleet won a battle through what her files describe as tactically indefensible chaos that somehow produced a perfect result. She has cross-referenced your military doctrine against 42 species and has filed 4 formal inquiries to my research division about the specific nature of human decision-making under impossible conditions." A pause. "She is 14 years old. She would like to meet one." Voss blinked. "Empress, My daughter's name is Stories.Reddit. She is standing outside this room because I locked the door, which she will have already overridden. Sira." The formal door behind the War Council opened. A hegemony adolescent walked through it, smaller than the adults, her chitin not yet fully developed, carrying the particular mix of studied formality and barely contained intensity that was apparently a constant feature of 14-year-olds regardless of biology. She walked to her mother's side with a dignity that was entirely genuine, and therefore slightly at odds with the speed at which she covered the distance. She looked directly at Voss. "You're the one who sat down," she said, in standard, accented, careful, clearly practiced to a point just past comfortable. "The Keeper sent data fragments to my mother's analysts 8 weeks ago. I read the assessment. It said you were the first contact who sat down across from it, rather than attempting to capture, flee, or classify." Voss glanced at the Keeper. The Keeper's amber eyes held exactly the expression of something that had sent data fragments to a young princess's research files, and was not particularly apologetic about it. "That's correct," Voss said. "Why?" Sira asked. "Specifically why? The analysts had 4 theories. I disagreed with all of them." He thought about it honestly, which took a moment because the honest answer required locating something he didn't usually look at directly. "Because it had been in a box for a long time. I thought maybe it needed something to be quiet for a moment, without anyone wanting anything from it. So I gave it that." Stories.Reddit was absolutely still in the way her species went still. A total body attention that had no precise human equivalent. A quality of focus that seemed to include her entire physical form rather than just her eyes. Then she said something in hegemony that the translator processed for 2 beats before producing. That is a very strange reason, and also the correct one. The Empress behind her made a sound across 3 harmonic registers that the translator marked as a sigh of a very specific kind. The sigh of someone who has been trying to prepare for exactly this outcome, and has known, for some time, that preparation was not going to help. The negotiation took 4 hours. Voss brought in Lieutenant Commander Yel Santos, who had a law degree she'd never used professionally, and a gift for identifying the structural weak points in arguments that presented themselves as immovable. The Empress brought in Veth Sassari, a diplomat who had the specific energy of someone who had been waiting for this conversation for a considerable portion of her career. The terms were these. The Keeper would remain unaffiliated with any empire, which was what the Keeper itself had always wanted, and was the first time in recorded history that an empire had formally agreed to it. The Perseverance would operate as an informal liaison vessel between the Keeper's movements and hegemony intelligence, which was something Fleet Command was going to have complicated feelings about, and which Voss noted was also a significant strategic asset for humanity, so perhaps the feelings could be mixed and productive. And Sierra Vethqui would be permitted regular correspondence with Voss and his crew, under a proposed cultural exchange framework that was, Voss privately assessed, Sierra's initiative from the start, and that the Empress had agreed to with the resigned cooperation of a person watching an inevitable thing happen at the speed she'd always known it would. When it was done and the channels closed, Voss sat in the briefing room. The Keeper settled beside him. "You knew," Voss said, "about Sierra, about her files, about how this was going to go." "I speculated," the Keeper said carefully. "You loaded the board." "I may have sent certain information, through certain back channels, to a research archive maintained by a young hegemony princess who had been compiling behavioral data on human empathy under pressure for 3 years and had a direct communications line to her mother's intelligence division." A pause. "I had been in a sealed box for 800 years on a ship that was also sealed. I have developed opinions about the kinds of introductions that produce worthwhile outcomes and the kinds that do not." Voss stared at the ceiling. "The kind that does not," the Keeper added, "typically begins with someone pointing a weapon." Sierra's first message arrived 3 weeks later. It was 17 pages, in meticulous standard, and contained 46 questions that ranged from tactically precise, how do human soldiers determine when to disengage without losing unit integrity, to genuinely curious, why do your vessels carry the names of abstract qualities rather than those of distinguished ancestors, to personal in a way that landed differently than the others, do you think that choosing difficulty on behalf of a stranger can be learned, or is it something you are born with and merely unlearn? Voss drafted his response over 2 evenings. He answered every question. The last one took the longest. "I think it can be learned," he wrote. "I have watched people who had every reason to stop caring learn to care again. It doesn't happen quickly and it looks different in every person it happens to. But I have not, in 19 years, met anyone who was genuinely incapable of it. I have met people who were damaged into believing they were incapable, which is different. The capacity was still there. It just needed someone to sit down across from it and not want anything from it for a while." He sent it and didn't think about it too hard. Sierra responded in 6 hours. Her reply was 22 pages. This went on for 2 months. The messages lost their formality gradually, the way ice loses its edges in water, not all at once but continuously. Sierra started including observations from her daily life, the specifics of hegemony court protocol, which she found largely theatrical, and which she documented with a precision that made Voss suspect she had been cataloging its absurdities for years in private. Her tutors, 2 of whom she found formidable, and 3 of whom she found exhausting for different reasons. The weight of being an empress's daughter in a civilization that had not had an heir in 40 years, and had therefore developed very strong collective opinions about what she should be and when and how. She sent him a diagram of human tactical doctrine, annotated in 3 colors with cross-references to 12 separate engagements. It was the most accurate external analysis of human military strategy Voss had encountered from any non-human source. He forwarded it to Fleet Command with a note that read, "You should probably be taking this seriously. She's 14. Voss told her about Priya. He wasn't sure why, it had no strategic relevance, it wasn't part of any negotiation. But Sierra had asked about his family in her 4th message, and answering with a deflection had felt dishonest in a way that mattered to him even when it would have been convenient. He told her about Priya's pressed flower collection and her mother's laugh and the every 3rd day calls. He told her about Sasha and Gordon, about orbital ball coaching and remembered birthdays, which he hadn't told anyone, and which was oddly easier to tell a 14-year-old hegemony princess at a distance of several light years. Sierra responded, "It sounds like she has what she needs. That seems like the most important thing. You miss her, but she is not missing anything. I think that is worth being grateful for, even when it is also painful." He read that 3 times. Then he set his calm down and sat in his cabin for a while. The complication arrived, as complications tend to, when things were going reasonably well. The former High Marshal, stripped of rank, awaiting trial, had not been sitting quietly in whatever holding facility the hegemony had assigned him. He had allies spread through the outer administrative territories, planted over 15 years with the patience of someone who had always understood that his plan was not a matter of months, but of decades. The plan was simple in the way that genuinely dangerous things often are. He moved faster than the hierarchy could respond. 4 hegemony warships came out of transit within firing range of the Perseverance in the Kareth debris field. No active transponders, no identification, opening fire before shields had calibrated. The next 14 minutes were the worst Voss had experienced since the 3rd year of his captivity. 2 crew members injured. The port engine took critical damage. They destroyed 1 attacker and drove off 2 others through a combination of Santos's tactical mind, the Perseverance's age giving it energy signatures that confused modern targeting systems, and the Keeper, who sat very still in the center of the bridge and did something to the attackers' navigation systems that caused 2 of their ships to briefly and completely believe they were somewhere else entirely. The 4th ship Voss chased himself, down into the debris field, through corridors of ancient wreckage, the Perseverance navigating by sensor and muscle memory, and 17 years of Voss knowing exactly what his ship could survive and what it couldn't. And then the attacker made 1 miscalculation about a rotating section of dead orbital platform, and the miscalculation was final. When it was over, Voss sat in his chair for a while. His hands were steady. They were always steady after a fight. He had learned not to read steadiness as meaning he was all right. "You're angry," the Keeper said. "Yes. Because they attacked your ship." "Because they attacked my crew." He looked at his hands. "My crew, there's a difference." "I know," said the Keeper. "I have been learning to understand it." A pause. "I want to tell you that it is tactically inefficient to feel this way. I have tried to construct an argument that it makes you worse at what you do. I cannot. I have concluded that it makes you better in ways that tactical models don't capture, which I find personally very disquieting." Despite everything, the ache in his ribs, the image of Santos's head wound, Voss almost smiled. The Empress's message came 4 hours later, formal in structure, carrying all the harmonic weight of official correspondence. But there was a register underneath it, something the translator flagged and then simply marked as * personal frequency, unexpected intensity. She thanked him for surviving. That was not standard hegemony diplomatic language. That was not language of any professional category Voss knew. Sierra's message came 30 minutes after. It was 1 paragraph. "I was afraid. I want you to know that I was afraid. My tutors say that expressing fear is vulnerability, and vulnerability in a political context is exposure. My mother says the same. I think they are wrong. If you had not survived and I had never told you that you matter to me, that would have been wasteful. I think waste is one of the worst things. I hope you are not hurt. I hope your crew is not hurt. I hope Priya's father comes home." He wrote back, "We're all right. Priya's father is coming home. Thank you for saying that. I think you're right about waste. I think it's braver to say the thing than to protect yourself from saying it, maybe especially then." The trial of the former High Marshal ran 11 days under hegemony law. The Keeper provided running commentary throughout, dispassionate and precise, the observations of something that had watched 12,000 years of political consequence and developed exact standards for how well a proceeding matched its stated purpose. On the 7th day, the Keeper said, The advocate has attempted a historical precedent that hasn't been applied in 6 centuries. It won't work. On the 11th day, it said nothing until the verdict was read. Then it said, quietly and with complete finality, "Good." Weeks later, the Perseverance limped toward drydock and Voss got 6 days leave. He went to Meridian Station. Priya had grown half an inch. She demonstrated this by standing very straight against the doorframe where Sasha had been marking her height since she was 2, tilting her chin up with unnecessary theatrical effort to maximize the measurement. Voss marked it in pencil, exactly as he always had, and felt the particular quality of ache that is not grief but is adjacent to it. Gordon made dinner. It was unexpectedly good, a slow-cooked thing that required thought and patience, and Voss ate it with the deliberate grace of someone making an honest effort rather than a performed one. Gordon told a story about his orbital ball team that was genuinely funny. Voss laughed at the right part, and it was not forced, and that felt like something worth noting privately. On the 3rd day, Priya asked him to tell her about the keeper. He told her all of it, the chest, the knocking twice, the cold floor, the half-ration bar held in 6 filaments, the woman moving a stone, the 800 years of being lonely in a vault. Priya listened with the total focused attention of very young children who have not yet learned that listening is something you do while also doing something else. "It was waiting for someone to just be nice to it," she said. "Yes." "That's sad," a pause, "but then you found it." "Yes." She nodded with the satisfaction of someone who has confirmed a theorem. "Tell me about the princess." He told her about Sira, the 17 pages, the 3-color diagram, the message about waste and the message about being afraid. Priya listened with the same quality of attention she'd given the keeper. "Does she have friends?" Priya asked. Voss thought about it honestly. "I think she's working on it." "You could be her friend," Priya said. "You're good at that." "I'm not sure I'm especially good at it." She looked at him with the patience of 7-year-olds who have identified that adults are saying something demonstrably false. "You sat down," she said, as if that was the whole of it, as if it was. He went back to the Perseverance. The repairs were finished. The crew was rested. The keeper had spent the 6 days reorganizing the archive, repairing the secondary navigation array using materials no one had known were aboard, and having a lengthy conversation with engineer Chow that had resulted in Chow requesting 2 weeks' leave to visit his parents. "You talked him into it," Voss said. "I pointed out that he had not seen them in 14 months and was maintaining the fiction of not missing them through a level of mechanical productivity that was impressive but not healthy." The keeper paused. He cried a little. "I found this appropriate." "Did you find it uncomfortable?" "I found it important," the keeper said. "I have come to understand that those 2 things are often the same, and that the discomfort is part of the importance, and that the importance does not diminish when the discomfort does." The Empress's private message arrived that evening, not official correspondence, personal register, careful and direct. "My daughter will be 15 in 40 days. In our tradition, a young member of the imperial family marks this passage by naming, publicly and formally, the individuals who have shaped their development. The names are a matter of permanent record, a pause in the harmonics that the translator rendered as something between breath and decision. She has asked to name you. I am asking your permission, which our law does not require, but which my daughter has told me is important to her, and what is important to her has become important to me." Another pause. "I am also asking, and I am aware this is unusual and that I have no formal mechanism for it, whether you would be present." Voss read it standing in the corridor outside the bridge. The Perseverance hummed around him in the particular register. It always hummed when they were in open space with no immediate destination, which he had always found calming in the way that familiar things are calming even when you have no particular reason to love them. The keeper appeared beside him. You already know what it says, Voss said. I could see the harmonic signature from across the ship. I try not to read private correspondence, but signatures carry, the way someone's posture carries from across a room. A pause. The Empress sent this in a register her court apparently has no official designation for. I have been compiling records of all the frequency registers I have encountered across 17 civilizations. This is the 43rd distinct register in her species' harmonic range. It appears most commonly in contexts involving children and the people those children love. Voss looked at the wall. I have waited, the keeper said, for 3,000 years to encounter something I genuinely did not have a category for. I have found several of them in the past year in the same location. A pause that had the quality of something being set down carefully. I find I am grateful. He wrote back to the Empress. He wrote to Sira separately, on a different channel, in a message that was shorter and took twice as long. I will be there, he wrote. It is an honor I haven't earned, but I will try to. You should know that if the situation were reversed, if I were naming the people who changed how I see things, your name would be on that list, near the top. You asked me once if choosing difficulty for a stranger can be learned. I've been thinking about it for months. I think most people are already doing it in small ways all the time. They just need someone to notice it and name it clearly. You noticed. You kept noticing. You named what you saw without apology. That is rarer than the thing itself, and it matters more than you know. Sira responded in 3 hours, 4 sentences. I have shown this to my mother. She read it twice. She said that you are trouble in the specific way that worthwhile people usually are. I think that is the best thing she says about anyone. The ceremony was held on the Unbroken Reckoning. The flagship had been stripped of its military bearing, draped in deep indigo, lit in a spectrum adjusted to accommodate human visual range. The corridors cleared of everything that announced war and dressed instead in everything that announced occasion. It was jarring, and it was beautiful in the way that things are beautiful when they reveal that something built for one purpose has always had the capacity for another. Voss, Santos, and Priya arrived together. Priya wore her best dress and carried a pressed flower from her collection. She held Voss's hand through the docking corridor and looked at everything with an expression of concentrated wonder that he would remember for the rest of his life. The keeper walked with them, in a formal capacity that had required 3 consultations between the ceremony's officiants before they designated it * honored elder, which the keeper found accurate enough not to object to. 400 hegemony dignitaries. The Empress in her full ceremonial armor, magnificent in the precise way that things are magnificent when they represent the culmination of generations of deliberate work, every detail intentional, every detail communicating authority and permanence. Sira walked out, and Voss's throat did something he hadn't prepared for. She walked with her mother's bearing and her own pace, her pale gold eyes scanning the gathered court and then finding Voss in the crowd and staying there for a moment before she began. She was going to be extraordinary. Not eventually. She already was. She read the names. Her tutors. The diplomat Vethsasari, who had taught her the structures she had spent years productively questioning. A retired captain who had told her at 9 years old that the only real military principle was that the person next to you matters more than the objective. Then Commander Eli Voss of the Perseverance. Both languages. Standard first, for the humans, for Priya, for the record that would be filed in human archives alongside the hegemony ones. Because he sat down, she said in Standard. In hegemony, in a phrasing the translator rendered as, because he understood that being willing to remain still with something difficult is more valuable than being skilled at defeating it. 400 hegemony courtiers made a sound the translator flagged as * formal acknowledgement, collective, genuine *. The distinction from the ceremonial version was something the translator noted carefully, something in the harmonic register that meant it was not performed. Priya's hand tightened in Voss's. Afterward, in a corridor set aside for the human delegation, Sira found them. She was out of the ceremony's bearing now, moving at her own speed, which was faster than protocol preferred. She stopped in front of Voss and looked at him. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Thank you for asking." She looked at Priya. Priya looked back, holding her flower with both hands. "You have your father's eyes," Sira said. "He has my mom's," Priya said, "but they look the same." Sira's expression shifted, something absorbing something new, the way the keeper absorbed things, with full attention and without hurry. Then she made a sound that the translator parsed as laughter, lower and harmonic and entirely genuine. "I know," Sira said to Priya. "I have files." "Can I see them?" Priya asked. "They're about him." "Priya," Voss said. "They are," Priya said, with absolute certainty. Sira looked at Voss. Voss looked at Sira. Neither of them said the thing they'd started to say. Priya watched both of them with the satisfaction of someone who had understood exactly what they were doing, and had been right. On the shuttle back, the keeper sat beside Voss while Priya slept against Santos's shoulder. The stars were visible through the forward viewport, deep and numerous and quiet. "What do you think?" Voss asked. The keeper considered for a long time. "I think," it said, "that what I have been studying for 3,000 years is not, as I originally classified it, an anomaly of behavior. I think it is a method. The most inefficient, the most irrational, the most repeatedly demonstrated method that any species in the 17 I have observed has ever found for making the future better than the past." Voss watched the stars. "A method for what?" "For being less alone," the keeper said. "Which is, when you reach the foundation of it, the only problem that any of us, any species, any empire, any ancient creature sealed for 8 centuries in a vault on a dead ship in a debris field, has ever actually been trying to solve." The shuttle moved through the dark. Behind them, the unbroken reckoning's lights were warm against the field. Somewhere aboard it, an empress stood alone in a corridor, and her harmonics, if you could read them from here, if you had spent long enough learning the registers beneath the registers, were doing something that had no precise translation. Something that was simply good. The keeper reached into a pocket Voss had not known it possessed, and produced the half-ration bar he had given it, 7 months ago, on the cold floor of a dead ship. It had kept it. Voss looked at it a long moment. "You never ate it?" "No," the keeper turned it in its filaments with the same care it had used the first time. "But I kept it. I have kept everything that was given freely without calculation. It is a small catalogue." A pause. "But it is mine." Priya shifted in her sleep and made a small sound without waking. Voss unstrapped his harness and moved to her, and she leaned into him without fully waking, still holding her pressed flower. Outside, the stars held still. The universe held all its old weight and all its old distances, unchanged. Voss held on. The keeper, in the back of the shuttle, ancient and asymmetrical and no longer sealed, made a sound that was not quite a word, something between gratitude and arrival, something that had been waiting a very long time to be made. Something that was, in the only language that had ever mattered, the sound of someone who was no longer alone. In the weeks between the attack and the ceremony, while the Perseverance healed in dry dock and the crew scattered to their separate lives, and the keeper catalogued and repaired and left small improvements throughout the ship like a tide leaving things behind, Voss found himself thinking about the High Marshal. Not with anger. He had moved past anger somewhere in the debris field, somewhere in the 14 minutes where anger had no useful application, and had been set aside with the practiced efficiency of someone who has learned that emotion and action are not the same thing. He thought about the High Marshal with something closer to curiosity. The man had spent 30 years planning to dissect the keeper. 30 years of careful preparation, of parallel systems, of a career used as cover for an entirely separate ambition. He had seen the keeper the way you see an asset, something to be taken apart, understood in pieces, reassembled into usefulness. It was not evil, Voss thought. It was, in fact, a perfectly logical approach. The keeper was genuinely incomprehensible, ancient, capable, operating by principles that no existing framework accounted for. Dissecting things was how most civilizations had historically dealt with what they could not understand. You could not manage what you could not classify. You could not classify what you could not examine. Examination required access. Access with something that did not want to be accessed required force. It was a completely coherent chain of reasoning, and it was also exactly the kind of reasoning that had gotten the Keth to call the keeper *mercy, and was now why the Keth no longer called anything anything. Voss mentioned this to the keeper one evening, sitting in the corridor outside the keeper's modified quarters, sharing a meal that Santos had made and that was, as Santos's meals always were, significantly better than ration bars. The keeper accepted a container of the heavily spiced component and held it in the way it always held things offered freely, as if the holding mattered as much as any other use. "You are not wrong," it said. The High Marshal's reasoning was coherent within its own framework. Most of the tragedies I have witnessed across 17 civilizations were coherent within their own frameworks. The framework is the problem, not the intelligence, not even the intention in most cases. It considered the food. They could not imagine a third option. What's the third option? Sitting down, it paused, waiting, asking questions without demanding answers on your schedule, accepting that some things take longer to understand than the span of a single project, a single career, a single reign. It was quiet for a moment. The hegemony has survived 12,000 years, which is genuinely remarkable. Do you know how they have done it? Good governance, efficient resource allocation, military superiority in the outer territories. Partially. But the primary reason their empire has not collapsed in the way that every other empire of comparable age has collapsed is this: every third generation, they produce a leader who is capable of being surprised. Not shocked, surprised. The distinction matters. Shock is the response of a system encountering what it cannot process. Surprise is the response of a system encountering what it was not expecting but can absorb. The keeper's amber eyes were very still. The Empress is one of those leaders. She has been surprised 3 times in 60 years. Each time she adjusted. The empire is healthier for each adjustment. What surprised her? Her daughter, the keeper said. That was the first one. The second was a resource conflict in the outer territories that she resolved by listening to the people who were doing the conflicting, which her advisors described as undignified, and which ended a 40-year war in 11 months. The third surprise was you. Voss looked at the keeper. Me, he said. You sat down. In 12,000 years of hegemony encounters with anomalous intelligences, with creatures that defied classification, with forces they could not immediately defeat or understand, no one has ever sat down. The keeper paused. She reviewed the sensor data from the derelict. Multiple times. I am told she has not discussed what she thought about it with her advisors. What do you think she thought about it? I think she thought, a pause. Which is the beginning of being surprised? Which is the beginning of adjusting? Which is, in my experience, the only reliable beginning of anything better than what came before. The dry dock finished its work. The Perseverance was whole, not new, never new again, but functional in the way of things that have been repaired carefully by people who knew them. The port engine ran clean. The archive system was faster than it had been before the attack and possibly faster than it had ever been, which Voss suspected was not purely the result of the repair crews. He filed the post-incident report. He attended the tactical debrief. He gave interviews to 2 separate Fleet Command investigators who wanted to understand how a single aging scout vessel had managed to hold off 4 hegemony warships. And he answered honestly. which was that it had been Santos, the crew, the debris field's complexity, and some assistance from a non-classified intelligence asset aboard the vessel whose capabilities he would describe in a separate classified annex. The classified annex was 4 pages long and was, Voss suspected, going to be classified for quite a long time. Santos found him after the last debrief, leaning against the corridor wall outside the briefing room with the careful stillness of someone waiting for the room to empty before they said what they were going to say. "Sierra's messages," Santos said. Voss waited. "I haven't read them, I wouldn't, but I've seen you reading them." She looked at him with the particular directness she'd developed across 12 years of serving with him, the kind of directness that had made her first a good officer and then, quietly and without announcement, his most trusted person. "It's a good thing, Voss. That's what I wanted to say. Whatever it is, it's a good thing. I can tell because you're easier to be around after you read them." He didn't say anything for a moment. "She's 14 years old and the heir to the hegemony throne," he said. "I know. She asked me whether choosing difficulty for strangers can be learned. She's been asking me questions like that for 6 months." "I know. That's not. It's not anything except what it is," Santos said. "Which is a kid who found an adult who takes her seriously and an adult who found a kid who asks the right questions. That happens sometimes. It doesn't have to be anything it isn't." She pushed off the wall. "I'm going to dinner. Chow's making something spiced. You should come." He came. Chow had made something spiced. The keeper attended and consumed most of it and expressed, in its particular careful way, that it found the combination of cardamom and something engineer Chow refused to identify professionally satisfying in a way it had not expected. The crew laughed. The keeper absorbed the laughter the way it absorbed everything, with the complete attention of something that has waited a long time to be in the room where things like this happen. The ceremony happened 40 days later, then the shuttle back, then Priya asleep. And the ration bar kept, and the sound the keeper made. And the stars holding still, the way they always do, indifferent and permanent and nevertheless, somehow not unkind. 2 months after the ceremony, a message arrived from Fleet Command. Not the usual administrative correspondence. A personal message from Admiral Reston, who had commanded the Dorne Station engagement, and who had been, for many years, the closest thing Voss had to a mentor, in the specific sense of someone who communicated primarily by pointing at things that needed doing and occasionally remembering to say that you had done them adequately. The message was short. "Voss saw your annexes, saw the treaty terms. Talked to the Empress's people once briefly. The keeper sat in on the call and corrected my translator twice, politely. A pause in the message as though the Admiral had stopped to consider something. You should know that what you did in that debris field is being cited in 6 ongoing diplomatic frameworks. Not the fight. The other thing. The sitting down. Apparently it was unusual enough to be noted in the hegemony's historical record." Another pause. "I don't entirely understand what you've done here. But I think you did it right, that's all." Voss read it once and then set his calm down. The keeper was across the room, reading something from the archive on a display it had learned to operate. It did not look up. "You read it," Voss said. "No," said the keeper. "But I can tell from the way you're sitting." Voss thought about that. How am I sitting? Like someone who has been told that a thing they did quietly, without being certain it was right, turned out to matter. The keeper turned a page. "You sit differently when things confirm what you already suspected but didn't want to claim." "And how is that?" "Still," said the keeper. "You sit very still, the way you sat in the derelict." Voss was quiet for a moment. Then he got up, went to his cabin, and called Priya. She answered on the second signal, already ready as though she'd been expecting it, which she probably had. She had her mother's instincts and her own calendar, and had probably had the call marked since the last one. "Hi, Dad," she said. "Hi," he said. "How are the flowers?" She told him about the flowers. She had found a new one, pressed between two pieces of glass to preserve the color. She described it at length, with the total commitment to detail that children bring to the things they love, and Voss listened with the same quality of attention that the keeper had been learning across months from watching him listen to her. Behind him, not in the cabin, not within sight, the keeper sat in the corridor and was quiet and was not alone. The stars moved outside the Perseverance's hull in the way they always moved, slowly, by the measure of any human life, by the measure of any empire, at a pace that only very old things can understand as movement at all. The keeper understood it. It had sat very still for a very long time, in a sealed vault in a dead ship, waiting for someone to knock back. Someone had. That was, in the end, the whole story, and it was enough.